Yeah, I mean, you have to factor it in. I mean, to your point, we were fortunate that Caitlin was able to get some gameplay and, very casually got back on the court and won the MVP at the qualifier. So happy for her. She's looked great. She's worked incredibly hard to be in a good spot from, the first day of training.
Watch her face carefully right there. That's not just concern. That's a general manager actively trying to justify what she knows is going to be an unpopular decision. Amber Cox just told Indiana Fever fans that Caitlin Clark, the player who single-handedly transformed their franchise from irrelevant to must-watch television, is going to be on a minutes restriction. And the reasoning? An ankle injury from a year ago that didn't stop Clark from dominating the Olympics qualifier and winning MVP. This isn't about player health. This is about something much more complicated, and the evidence is sitting right there in their roster construction.
Players 40 minutes every night.
Okay, but listen, that goes directly to Caitlin Clark. Sophie Cunningham was never playing 40 minutes a night when the team was healthy. Sophie Cunningham was coming off the bench, shooting threes, being an enforcer, playing defense. Sophie Cunningham was playing like maybe 20 minutes a game for real. That is strictly about Caitlin Clark, who was playing 31 minutes a game and stuff like that. You trying to tell me you're trying to limit her to what, 25 minutes? Like, nah, we're not doing that. We're not doing that, bro. We are trying to go full throttle. Like, teams got better. Y'all just
right there, we don't want to play players 40 minutes every night. That statement is aimed directly at one person, and it's not Sophie Cunningham. Last season, Cunningham averaged 22 minutes per game coming off the bench as an enforcer and three-point specialist. She was never playing 40-minute nights even when the team was healthy. Caitlin Clark averaged 35 minutes per game during her rookie season. That's the player they're talking about restricting, and here's what makes this particularly concerning. While Indiana is talking about limiting their generational talent, A'ja Wilson isn't facing any minutes restrictions in Las Vegas. Neither is Breanna Stewart in New York. The league's other superstars are preparing for full workloads, while the Fever are already making excuses for why their best player won't be at full capacity. The timeline doesn't add up either. Clark suffered that ankle injury in July 2024 during the regular season. By February 2025, she was dominating in Puerto Rico at the Olympic qualifier, moving without any visible limitations, hitting step-back threes, running the floor in transition. If the injury was serious enough to warrant minutes restrictions 9 months later, she wouldn't have been named tournament MVP.
But I said this on draft night, I really didn't expect Raven to be there. She was someone that, I kind of had in that 4, 5, 6 range. I think point
malpractice. You are the only person that had her in the 4. You are the only person who thought that. Nobody else thought Raven Johnson was going to be a top 4 pick. Have you lost your mind? It's like, come on, bro.
A guard like her that can come in and run a team with great leadership, great competitive drive, obviously on the defensive.
And there it is. The real reason becomes clear when you look at their offseason moves. Indiana didn't just add depth at guard. They went on a signing spree that makes no sense for a team built around a generational point guard. They signed Ty Harris in free agency. They used their 10th overall draft pick on Raven Johnson, another point guard. They brought back Sophie Cunningham. Count the guards on this roster. They've got 5 players who primarily handle the ball or play on the perimeter. Meanwhile, their front court remains paper thin. Aaliyah Boston is their only proven interior presence. The backup center situation is a question mark. They had opportunities in the draft to address size, players who could have provided rim protection and rebounding. Instead, they drafted another guard. This roster construction tells you everything about their philosophy. They're not building around Caitlin Clark's strengths. They're building a rotation that allows them to limit her impact, whether intentionally or through misguided strategy.
End of the floor is really, really elite already. And then you see how her game has grown, shot almost 40% from 3-point this year. I mean, we just really loved everything about her. So when she was sitting there at 10, of course we were going to take her. So yes, it adds tremendous depth. But because we have Ty Harris, because, obviously we've got Caitlin back in healthy, it gives her a chance to really grow. For every rookie coming in this league, there is a learning curve. It is faster, it is more physical. So this gives Raven the opportunity to step into camp, to learn from our veterans. And, we expect her to contribute, no doubt about it. But, it gives her a chance to really get comfortable and, find.
Listen to how Amber Cox frames the Raven Johnson pick. She claims Johnson was in her top 4 to 6 range, that she didn't expect her to fall to 10th. But go back and look at every major draft board from analysts who cover this league full-time. Nobody had Raven Johnson in the top 6, most had her projected between 8th and 12th, exactly where she was selected. Johnson is a defensive specialist who shot 38% from 3 in her final college season. That's solid but not elite. She's not the kind of offensive creator you build around. She's a complementary piece, someone who can guard opposing point guards and knock down open shots. That's valuable, but it's not what the Fever needed at pick 10. What they needed was size. They needed a backup big who could spell Aliyah Boston and provide interior defense when Boston sits. They needed shooting from the forward positions to space the floor for Clark's drives. Instead, they took another guard, and Cox is selling it as a value pick that fell into their lap. The justification keeps shifting too. First it's about the injury. Then it's about not wanting to play anyone 40 minutes. Then it's about creating depth for back-to-back games. These are solutions in search of a problem, because the actual problem, that they don't trust their system to maximize Caitlin Clark, is something they can't say out loud.
Back-to-backs, we're playing every other day just about. So being able to create a rotation that does have some depth. We have a lot of versatility in this group. I'm really excited about that, so that we're fresh when we get to the playoffs. And, Kelsey Mitchell's wheels don't fall off this time. That's the goal. I think that was really a point of emphasis in this free agency, to make sure that we were really smart about ensuring the health and well-being of our.
Now watch this part again, because the language matters. Cox talks about players ramping up in an appropriate fashion and references Sophie Cunningham and Ty Harris not having played in game action. But Caitlin Clark has played in game action. She just won MVP at an international tournament 6 weeks ago. She's been practicing at full intensity. The medical staff has cleared her. So why the restriction? Because last season exposed something the Fever front office doesn't want to admit. They don't know how to build an offensive system that protects their star player while maximizing her impact. Last year, when Clark played heavy minutes, the offense ran through her almost exclusively. When she sat, the team fell apart. Instead of developing a coherent offensive scheme with multiple actions and secondary creators, they're solving the problem by just playing her less. Compare this to how Las Vegas uses Aja Wilson. Wilson played 32 minutes per game last season and won MVP. The Aces have offensive sets that get her touches in her spots, but they also have Chelsea Gray running pick and rolls, Kelsey Plum coming off screens, Jackie Young attacking closeouts. When Wilson sits, the offense doesn't crater because they have a system, not just a star. Indiana's approach suggests they still haven't figured that out. Rather than building a system that can function with Clark on the floor for 35 minutes and maintain competency when she sits for 13, they're just going to play her less and hope the depth carries them.
So what we don't want to do is overload someone that is coming back from injury. We expect them to be, available and practicing, but there's a difference between, not playing games or playing games. And so, that factored into some of the decisions in terms of having some guard depth to make sure that we are allowing these players to really ramp up in an appropriate fashion. I think, one of the learnings from last year was.
Here's the context that makes this even more frustrating for Fever fans. Last season was supposed to be a learning year. Clark was a rookie, the team was rebuilding, expectations were modest. Then Clark happened. She transformed that franchise overnight. Attendance doubled, ratings went through the roof. The Fever became nationally relevant for the first time in years. They made the playoffs as the 6th seed and pushed the Connecticut Sun to a competitive series. The foundation was there. The Clark-Mitchell backcourt showed real chemistry in the final month of the season, becoming one of the most productive duos in the league. Aliyah Boston's development continued. Everything pointed toward year 2 being a leap forward, and then the offseason happened. While other playoff teams aggressively upgraded, Connecticut added Marina Mabrey. New York retained their core, Minnesota made moves, Indiana ran it back with minor additions. They didn't address their lack of three-point shooting from the forward spots. They didn't upgrade their backup center position. They didn't add a veteran wing who could create her own shot. What they did do is add more guards and start talking about minutes restrictions for their best player. That's not a recipe for a leap. That's a recipe for spinning wheels while the rest of the league passes you by. So let's put all the pieces together, because this is about more than just minutes restrictions or roster construction. This is about organizational philosophy and whether the Indiana Fever actually understand what they have in Caitlin Clark. Start with the injury excuse. Clark suffered an ankle injury in July 2024. By February 2025, she was playing at an elite level in Puerto Rico, showing no limitations in her movement, winning tournament MVP. The medical timeline doesn't support a minutes restriction 9 months after the initial injury, especially when the player has been cleared and is practicing at full intensity. If this was really about health, the team would have held her out of the Olympic qualifier entirely. They didn't, because they knew she was fine. Then look at the roster construction. 5 guards on a team built around a point guard who needs the ball in her hands to be effective. Meanwhile, the front court remains thin. The three-point shooting from forward positions is questionable, and the backup center situation is unresolved. These aren't the moves of a front office maximizing their stars' strengths. These are the moves of a front office hedging their bets, building in excuses for why the offense might struggle. The Raven Johnson pick is particularly telling. Amber Cox claims she had Johnson in her top 4 to 6 range, but that doesn't match any credible draft analysis from the time. Johnson went exactly where she was projected, late lottery, early teens. She's a solid defensive player who can knock down open threes, but she's not an impact offensive creator. At pick 10, Indiana could have addressed their size deficiency or added elite shooting. They chose another ball handler instead. And then there's the broader context of how other contending teams are operating. Las Vegas isn't talking about limiting Aja Wilson's minutes. New York isn't restricting Breanna Stewart. Minnesota isn't putting Nafisa Collier on a pitch count. The league's best teams are building systems that maximize their stars while protecting them through scheme and depth, not by just playing them less. What Indiana is doing feels like organizational fear, masquerading as caution. They're afraid of overworking Clark, afraid of relying on her too heavily, afraid of what happens if the offense runs through her and it doesn't work. So instead of committing fully to building around their generational talent, they're building in limitations from day one. Think about what this communicates to Clark herself. You just had the most impactful rookie season in WNBA history. You transformed a struggling franchise into a playoff team. You won Olympic qualifier MVP. You're healthy. You're practicing at full intensity. You're ready to take the next step. And your front office's response is to tell you they're going to limit your playing time because of an injury from 9 months ago that clearly isn't affecting you anymore. That's not player development. That's not championship-level organizational thinking. That's covering for the fact that they haven't built a coherent system to support you. The comparison to last season's playoff exit is instructive too. Amber Cox mentions that Kelsey Mitchell's wheels fell off in the playoffs, implying that heavy minutes during the regular season led to fatigue. But Mitchell played 31 minutes per game during the regular season. That's not an unusually heavy load for a star guard. The issue wasn't minutes, it was depth and system. When Mitchell or Clark had off nights, there was no secondary creation, no offensive structure to fall back on. The solution isn't to play your stars less. The solution is to build better offensive sets that create easier looks and don't require heroic individual efforts every possession. Watch how the best teams in the league operate. Las Vegas runs a motion-heavy offense with multiple actions designed to get Aja Wilson touches in the post, but they also have Spain pick-and-rolls for Chelsea Gray, pin-downs for Kelsey Plum, and dribble handoffs for Jackie Young. When Wilson sits, the offense doesn't fall apart because the system creates good shots regardless of personnel. That's what championship organizations do. They build systems that amplify their stars while maintaining functionality across different lineups. Indiana doesn't have that yet. Last season, when Clark sat, the offense often stagnated. When Mitchell had an off night, there was no plan B. The response should have been to hire offensive-minded assistants, develop a more sophisticated playbook, and add players who fit specific roles within that system. Instead, they added more guards and started talking about restrictions. Here's what makes this particularly frustrating. Caitlin Clark doesn't need to be protected from herself. She's proven she can handle heavy workloads. At Iowa, she played massive minutes in high-pressure tournament games and delivered at an elite level. In the WNBA last season, her efficiency actually improved as the season went on, and she adjusted to the league. At the Olympic qualifier, she was the best player on the floor while playing significant minutes. This isn't a player who wilts under pressure or breaks down physically when asked to carry a load. What she needs is a system that maximizes her skills and teammates who complement her strengths. She needs floor-spacing forwards who can knock down threes when she drives and kicks. She needs a rim-running center who can finish lobs and pick and roll. She needs secondary ball handlers who can initiate offense when she's being face-guarded or needs a possession off. Those are solvable problems through smart roster construction and scheme. Instead, Indiana added more guards, which creates overlap and potentially takes the ball out of their best players' hands. They didn't address the spacing issues, they didn't upgrade the front court. And now they're preemptively lowering expectations by talking about minutes restrictions before the season even starts. The other concerning element is the timing of these comments. This isn't Amber Cox responding to a question about Clark's health in training camp after seeing something concerning. This is a planned interview with the Indianapolis Star, where she proactively brings up minutes restrictions and injury concerns. That's messaging. That's the front office setting expectations, preparing the fan base for a scenario where their best player isn't playing as much as they'd like. Why do that, unless you're already planning to limit her? If Clark was going to play her normal 33 to 35 minutes and the injury was truly a non-issue, there's no reason to bring it up in a February interview. The fact that Cox is already planting these seeds suggests the decision has been made. Clark is going to play less, and they need a narrative to justify it. Compare that to how other teams talk about their stars in the offseason. When Las Vegas media asks about A'ja Wilson, the response is about her offseason training, her expanded role, her leadership. When New York talks about Breanna Stewart, it's about championship expectations and how they're building around her. Nobody is preemptively explaining why their best player might play fewer minutes. That difference in messaging reveals a difference in organizational confidence. Championship-caliber teams believe in their stars and build everything around maximizing their impact. Rebuilding teams hedge, make excuses, and try to manage expectations. Indiana is acting like a rebuilding team despite having a generational talent who already proved she can lead them to the playoffs. And let's address the elephant in the room. What happens if this approach fails? If Indiana limits Clark's minutes, loads up on guard depth, and the team struggles to score in crunch time because their best player is sitting, what's the adjustment? Do they admit the strategy was wrong and unleash her? Or do they stick with the plan and waste a year of her prime? Because here's the reality. Caitlin Clark is on a rookie contract. The Fever have her under team control for 4 years, but that doesn't mean they have 4 years to figure this out. Every season matters. Every year of development matters. If they spend year 2 experimenting with minutes restrictions and guard rotations instead of building a championship-caliber system around their star, that's a wasted year. And in a league where championship windows are narrow and star players have options, wasted years add up quickly. So the question for Indiana Fever fans is this: do you trust this front office to maximize Caitlin Clark's prime years? Because everything we've seen this offseason suggests they're more concerned with managing risk than chasing upside. They're building a team designed not to fail spectacularly, rather than a team designed to win a championship. And for a franchise that just experienced the most exciting season in their history, thanks to one player's brilliance, that's a devastating shift in philosophy. Caitlin Clark doesn't need minutes restrictions. She needs a competent offensive system, complementary players who fit her skill set, and an organization that believes in her enough to build everything around her talent. Indiana has given her more guards, injury excuses, and lowered expectations. That's not a recipe for year 2 success. That's a recipe for frustration, wasted potential, and eventually, difficult conversations about whether this franchise is the right place for a generational talent to spend her prime. The league is watching, the fans are watching, and most importantly, Caitlin Clark is watching how her organization responds to success. Does Indiana double down on what worked and build a championship contender around their star? Or do they hedge, play it safe, and hope that depth and caution somehow lead to better results than unleashing their best player? Right now, all signs point to the latter. And if you're a Fever fan, that should terrify you. Because generational talents don't come around often, and when you have one, you don't limit them. You build everything around them and let them cook. Indiana seems to have forgotten that lesson, and by the time they remember it, it might be too late. Drop a comment. Do you think the Fever are making the right call with these minutes restrictions, or are they wasting Caitlin Clark's prime before it even starts? Because I know where I stand, and I'm not buying the injury excuse for a second.